Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we're going to have a look at the sociocultural determinants of health. When we look at the syllabus, these determinants of health come from the focus question, what influences the health of individuals? Now previously we had a look at the individual factors, so for example knowledge, skills and attitudes, and in this lesson we're going to have a look at sociocultural factors, so for example family, peers, media, religion and culture. It's also important that while in this lesson we'll learn about those sociocultural factors, for you to be able to analyse how an individual's health can be determined by a range of different factors and varying combinations. So having a look at, well, how do some of these sociocultural factors combine, such as, family and culture, to determine an individual's health. So we'll start by having a look at, what are the determinants of health? Now, the determinants of health are the individual, the socioeconomic, the sociocultural, and environmental factors, which can have both positive and negative impacts or influences on the health of an individual or of certain populations. Now in this video we're just going to have a look at the individual determinants, but it's important to understand, the fact that there are these 4 different determinants of health. Now when you look at each one of these determinants in depth, you'll be able to have a look at the positive and negative influences for each one and see how they can actually affect an individual or a population's health. So again, remember that we have these 4 determinants of health. We have individual, which we have already had a look at. So that was in a previous lesson. So if you've missed that one, go back to the YouTube channel and have a look for the individual determinants video. And sociocultural determinants, which is what this lesson will have a look at. Environmental determinants and socioeconomic determinants. So when we have a look at sociocultural determinants, basically built around these 5 areas of family, our peers, media, religion and culture. Now obviously some of these things can combine together, so having a look at family and culture and religion might actually all be related to each other or impact an individual's health in a certain way, and then obviously looking at things like media, peers and culture can obviously impact each other as well. So each of these different factors will have their own contributions or determinants in relation to health, but can also be combined with other areas of sociocultural determinants to impact an individual's health. So we'll start by having a look at a family. Now, the research sort of says that with the increased family cohesion, so, how well a family interacts with each other, how well they communicate, how well they get along, the sort of care and support that they provide for each other, that's generally going to increase resilience, and especially amongst young people. So there is a known link between, families who have a good level of cohesion, generally young people who are residing within those families have high levels of resilience, which means that they can sort of bounce back or cope with difficult situations or challenging situations for them. And so when we're looking at health, that obviously has quite a large impact on an individual's health in relation to the different dimensions of health. Now, families are generally responsible for providing young people, or providing each other, with food, water, safe housing and emotional support. And we know that those 4 things there are obviously very much key to being able to achieve positive or good health outcomes. So if an individual doesn't have access to food or water or safe housing, these are obviously some very simple staple things which can lead to poor health outcomes. And that goes the same for with emotional support. Now, in relation to attitudes and values, families play a really important role in modelling good health practices and positive health attitudes. So, for example, if parents decide to, or the guardian at home decides to put a healthy meal on the table and the young people obviously eat that meal as well, those, people who are responsible for looking after the young people in the family are modelling good health practices, and so therefore young people grow up knowing that they need to eat a healthy meal at dinner times or at lunch, breakfast, that sort of thing, and therefore carry those attitudes and practices throughout their lives. As they leave home, they know that they need to have, sort of 3 meals a day, which are healthy meals, and they know what that looks like because it's been modelled within a family situation. Now, sometimes we can see a negative impact on an individual's health in relation to family, and this might be if there's been some form of loss or grief in the family, so a family member has passed away. Sometimes this can impact an individual's emotional health. Also, things like there may have been a traumatic event. So, for example, a family being involved in a car accident where all members of the family are okay, but perhaps there may be some physical trauma which may exist there, so obviously impacting on their physical health. The other aspect is the separation of family members, so whether that's due to marriage separation or just moving to different locations, can also have a negative impact on the individual and their health in relation to the attitudes that they have, based around relationships, and because that may have been damaged from separation. When we look at peers, we understand that peers play such a large role in supporting and encouraging individuals to make healthier choices. And so when we look at, say, teenagers or adolescents, the peers are generally their most sort of go-to person or source of information or source of influence. And so often a lot of the things that they do or their behaviours are heavily based on what their peers determine. And so you can see that there's obviously going to be positive outcomes of this and negative outcomes. So some of the positive things in relation to, these determinants of peers is that if a peer group have common attitudes, so for example, the attitudes of being engaged in physical activity, they might be playing sport as a team, they're supporting each other to ensure that they're engaging in regular physical activity. Increasing social interaction, so obviously, if you've got a peer group or a smaller group of peers and, you do have these common attitudes or you do spend time together, it's going to improve your sort of social, emotional well-being and therefore obviously have a positive impact on your health if you have that support network outside of your family. Now, you can also see that there are some negative impacts that peers can have on an individual, and this is generally based around a lack of support. So whether, peers aren't supporting positive health choices that someone has decided to engage in. So, for example, someone might decide that, they're not going to drink. They might be doing October and they go out for, a social drink with friends, and friends sort of give them a hard time about it. So that's obviously having a negative impact and making it difficult for that individual to make positive health choices. The differing values amongst peers can also have an impact on the health behaviours and the health outcomes for individuals, in that if peers disagree on things, because they generally, especially adolescents, if they rely so heavily on the endorsement of their peers or acceptance from their peers, so regardless of whether they agree with them or not, they may choose to go with that because that's, what the cool thing to do is. So things like, underage drinking, smoking, drug use, that sort of thing would come into play with those differing values. And then obviously that then sort of transfers into that concept of peer pressure. So sometimes peer pressure can actually be positive or negative. It might be peer pressure to join the local football team, which could have positive outcomes in relation to physical health and social health. But then negative peer pressure, having a look at things like, choosing to drink alcohol or consume drugs when you are not ready or don't wish not to do so. The media plays a really big role in shaping our values and attitudes and also providing us with health information. Now, some would argue that in the last 5 to 10 years that the media has actually, increased their impact over other determinants such as family or peers because with the resurgence of social media. Now, when we have a look at media, there's lots of different forms of media, but basically things like TV, the internet, social media, news, whether it's online news or newspapers, and magazines all have the capacity to impact the decisions we make about our health, and either in a positive or a negative way, through lots of different mediums. So having a look at pictures or videos or images, decisions on social media, having a look at newspaper articles or news articles about, positive health status, or, about looking at things, say, for example, road accidents occurring over the holidays. These sorts of things can have quite a heavy impact on us. And so when we look at these sources of media, they're responsible for promoting health, or responsible for providing us with, information which are going to shape our attitudes and beliefs and values around the decisions and health behaviours that we choose. And so, therefore, when we look at health promotion in the media, it needs to be presented via the media in an equitable manner. So, if we have a look at, say, how road safety is presented in the media, it's obviously generally done by government or non-government organisations, and it's sending out, generally a positive message, or a message which is of concern, trying to shape our values and change our health behaviours, because of the current data that exists around it is saying that we need to make different decisions or different behaviours in relation to certain health issues. Now, when we look at social media in particular, it can have a very positive or negative impact on our health. And often we look at the negative impact, this concept of the fact that social media can sometimes display unrealistic expectations of what actually healthy is. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. You can see that, social media can also promote, health behaviours as well. So you see on social media a lot of, fitness or healthy people promoting their body or their diet or their way of life. And sometimes that can obviously be a good thing and motivate people to engage in those sorts of behaviours, but can also be a negative thing in that it's sort of setting unrealistic expectations, or actually, putting up stereotypes which aren't necessarily real, especially in relation to gender or sports-specific things in that aspect. You can also see that social media is really good for health promotion in relation to starting various movements and having a look at things like online bullying or cyberbullying, and being able to sort of use hashtags to promote positive health behaviours, such as, speak out or stand up, those sorts of things. So you can see that social media, has both positive and negative aspects in relation to contributing to sociocultural determinants and the behaviours that young people, or the behaviours that people choose to engage in, which will have either positive or negative impact on their health. When we look at religion, religions obviously all have their own different things which they abide by, or which they try to keep to, but generally some things that religions are focused around which can have impact on our health are things around sort of the food that is consumed, sexual activity, or drug use. So obviously when we look at the dimensions of health, we see spiritual health, and obviously this is where religion comes in and can have quite a good impact, as it can increase the spiritual health and increase hope and optimism for the individual, which is going to help them to make positive health behaviours. Now, religious beliefs generally contribute to increased health outcomes, and this is because of these, what may seem as restrictions to some people, but these sort of guidelines that certain religions have around food, sexual activity, and drug use. So, for example, those religions who look at the concept of abstaining from sexual activity until marriage, obviously rates of sexually transmitted infections or unwanted pregnancies are going to be a lot lower among those religions. So that's a positive health outcome. And that's the same with having a look at, limiting alcohol use, or not even drinking alcohol at all, or, having a look at the fact that some of these diets associated with religions are vegetarian diets. That means that we're going to see, decrease in alcohol-related diseases and diseases related to high-fat diets, such as diabetes and cancers and heart disease. So you can see here that overall religion generally has that ability to increase our health outcomes, but also to encourage people who do have a religious belief to make positive health decisions in relation to the food that they eat, the lifestyle behaviours in which they engage in. Finally, we have a look at the culture, and this is where the culture comes from, the socio part of the sociocultural determinants. Now, culture can come from a lot of different areas, but generally we look at gender, so for example, like a male or female culture, and age, so looking at the concept of youth culture, location or ethnicity. Now, when we look at all these different cultures, there can be subcultures within a culture, and the main thing to realise is that each one of these cultures have different sets of values and beliefs, which can impact an individual's health outcomes. In Australia, we generally obviously have a lot of different cultures, but two cultures which we need to have a look at that are, I guess, highly disadvantaged in relation to health outcomes Australians born overseas and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations. Now, when we have a look at overseas born Australians, they generally have decreased health outcomes. And this is generally because of the fact that they are non-English speaking, and so therefore generally have less access to education or health information services in which they can decipher and actually understand their diet. So they may have come from a country where, so for example, Asian people, their diet is heavily based around vegetables, low fat. They move to, a city in Australia where, they may have a lot more access to different sorts of foods in relation to fast foods, a variety of restaurants and that sort of thing. So their diet may be very different to what they were previously used to. Just having a look at their cultural beliefs might be different to what they, another culture within their community are. So having a look at that concept of, peers and being able to interact and, having views that are different. And so that may also cause them to make decisions which are against their cultural beliefs if they're trying to sort of fit in and engage in Australian life. Because of the fact that they're non-English speaking, they generally have lower employment rates because they find it difficult to seek jobs because of the fact that they, have difficulty speaking English. And also, some of these cultures, they may have decreased physical activity rates because of specific cultural beliefs. So, for example, some cultures, females are not encouraged to engage in physical activity, so this can have an impact on their overall physical health. Now, when we look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, they also have decreased health outcomes. And this generally equates to a decrease in life expectancy. So we know that there's that gap in life expectancy between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. And this is generally due to the fact that they have poor and remote living conditions. So a lot of the ATSI populations in Australia are living in rural and remote areas, so have a decreased access to education, decreased employment rates, decreased access to healthy foods and fresh foods. And so therefore, when we look at that concept of health literacy, ATSI populations and overseas born Australians are going to have the decreased health literacy because of their inability to interact with, with education or within the workforce. And so when we think about that, culture can have quite a positive impact in relation to, sort of location. If we're living by the beach, it might be, quite a physical environment. Or it can actually have quite a negative impact if we look at different cultures that are living within Australia. So finishing up, just remember that when you look at these determinants of health, these are things that you're going to need all the way throughout Year 11 and Year 12 PDHPE. And so remembering that we've already had a look at individual determinants of health, and then in this lesson had a look at the socio-cultural determinants of health. So you really need to understand what each these determinants cover and how they affect an individual's health, and analyse how some of them may impact, if they are sort of joined together.